Materia Toure.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On May 30th this year, John Key confirmed for the country what the National Party's election campaign strategy is going to be all about. He announced the National Party's election campaign, which is a war on children. The National Party is about to embark on a war on children. On that day, during his post-cabinet press conference, he confirmed that his government will do everything they can to undermine the rights of families to secure livelihoods through the decision to proceed with the vicious, anti-women, sexist recommendations of the Welfare Working Group. He confirmed that the misogynist recommendations of the Welfare Working Group. He confirmed that his government, John Key's government, will confine our country's poorest children to even greater poverty. And what was his justification? Well, he compared today's unemployment rates in 2011 to those of 40 years ago. 40 years ago, he said, in the 70s it was 2% and now it's much bigger and therefore it's all terrible and everything's broken. 40 years ago, John Key, this country had an employment policy of full employment, where government showed genuine leadership and supported business to make sure there were jobs created so that every person who was able to and wanted to work could. Where are those jobs now? Nowhere, because this government has shown no leadership at all. This government has done nothing to create employment, nothing to show government leadership, nothing to provide genuine business incentives to those businesses in New Zealand, New Zealand-owned businesses, to provide jobs, more jobs for our people. And in fact, this government, John Key and his Finance Minister Bill English, they take great pride in the fact we have a low employment economy in this country. Don't forget, he was so proud that we have such low wages and considers that to be a market opportunity for New Zealand, that we have low wages here and might attract new businesses from outside. International corporates might come here and want to employ our people on miserable low wages because that's a market opportunity for New Zealand, selling our families, selling our children off to those international corporates so that they can make money off the backs of the families in New Zealand who work, and providing no government leadership and no support to New Zealand businesses who want to provide and support New Zealand families, New Zealand workers here. And not only is he using, John Key, irrelevant statistics to justify himself, he is in complete denial about the growing gap between rich and poor. When asked about this growing gap between rich and poor last week, John Key said, "Are we deeply unequal? I'm not sure that's right. I haven't had a really good look." How disgraceful that the Prime Minister of this country has not bothered to understand the extent of the poverty, severe poverty, faced by New Zealand children in this country. And it's not like he doesn't have the people around him to help him find out, maybe to help him have a look at what is really going on for New Zealand families. John Whitehead, the outgoing head of Treasury, knows how serious the growing gap between rich and poor is. Treasury understands that, and in John Whitehead's report he showed graphs of how bad it is. And let me show you what those graphs were. This comes from John Whitehead's report. It's a graph of income inequality comparing New Zealand to other countries. And right here we see that New Zealand is the 6th worst in the OECD, the 6th worst country for the growing gap between rich and poor. That is shameful, and shameful that John Key doesn't bother to understand this, because that means thousands and thousands of New Zealand children living in severe poverty. Do you want to know what John Whitehead also showed in his report? He had this graph here, which shows the growth in income inequality. And down here, at the bottom, it shows that New Zealand has the worst record for growing the gap. New Zealand has the worst record for growing the gap, growing it the fastest and growing it the most. That is a disgrace in this country. We have abundant wealth in this country, and it is not getting to the people who need it the most. It is going to those who have the most. And we've seen how John Key and his government have continued that appalling trend through their tax cuts for the wealthy, through their increase in GST for the poor and through the failure to increase the minimum wage or to support beneficiaries so that they have a livable income. Maybe he wants some other, maybe he would like some other evidence too. Peter Gluckman, the chief science advisor that he employed for this very purpose, to provide him with evidence so that he would have, on a case, but evidence that he's quite happy to ignore. Peter Gluckman has also identified in his report from last week how serious the issues are for the growing gap between rich and poor and inequality and its impacts on our children. So John Key, in case you haven't bothered to go and have a look at how bad it is, let me tell you, the first victims of an unequal society and an unfair economy are always our children. There's around 240,000 children who live in severe poverty in this country. And that means for those kids that they live in cold, damp homes, where they get colds and flus that keep them home from school. It means for many a persistent sore throat, and for some, disgraceful levels of rheumatic fever that steals decades from the lives of these children. Rheumatic fever kills these children early. John Key, I haven't really looked into it, he says. It means 240,000 children go without the basics every day. Raincoats, shoes, a bike, school trips, glasses so they can see the school board. It means many of these children in poverty are living in families who are dependent on a benefit, because benefits are kept so low by first the Labour government and now by National. Many of these children, though, also have parents who are in full-time work, or full-time work paid under the minimum wage, or in casual or in uncertain jobs, earning a minimum wage that keeps them poor, because again, Labour before them and now National have kept the minimum wage so low these families simply can't survive without government support. National has made vulnerable families the enemy in their campaign. They've made vulnerable families the enemy, and they've launched their attacks, whether it's cuts in services, cuts to income, increasing the gap between those who have the most and those in our country, our own families, who need the most. The Green Party will not be part of this vicious attack on families and children. We will fight against this war on children launched by John Key. The Green Party has the solutions to bring out of poverty 100,000 children within just a few years. One of the ways that we'll do that is through extending the in-work tax credit to those families who are in most need. Now, Labour's unfair policy of the past meant that the beneficiary families were the ones most likely to be kept out of accessing that funding. The Green Party will remove the discrimination that those families have faced for too many years, and will make sure that they get access to the $60 a week that can make a real difference to those families that other families do who are in work. We'll also increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour, and I'm very pleased that both the Labour Party and the Māori Party are committed to that policy as well, because that means that there is genuine political consensus that people who work full-time should get a living wage. John Key. We will also make sure that the training incentive allowance is extended to beneficiaries both on the DBB and on sickness. Because if there's one thing we can do with those who are dependent for whatever reason on a benefit, is we can make sure that they get access to the best possible education, so that they can, when they are able to move into work and to get a good job, they're more likely to get a very high paying job, a good paying job, and more likely to be able to sustain themselves and their families into the future. That's how you care for people when they are in need. That's how you care for children, both their immediate needs and well into the future. You know, it reminds me about John Key and his statement around minimum wage, actually. Remember, he said that he wouldn't tolerate putting it up because it would cost jobs. Well, it's frankly, John Key, duplicitous to oppose the minimum wage on the basis that some people might lose their jobs, when John Key's government in the budget announces $1 billion worth of cut spending in public services. That means cuts to jobs. It doesn't mean cuts to BMWs. It doesn't mean cuts to more flights and helicopters. $1 billion worth of cuts in spending to the public services mean cuts to jobs, and that means families who will suffer. The Green Party believes in a smart, green, compassionate economy, and that's what we'll be working for. Thank you.
Nikki Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.